Let me paint you a picture of my life. I'm Madeline, turning 30 next month, living in Seattle where the rain matches my mood more often than I'd like to admit. My story isn't unique. Plenty of eldest daughters become substitute parents, but knowing that doesn't make it any easier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was 10 when my father's heart gave out unexpectedly one Tuesday morning. One minute he was making breakfast, the next, he was gone, leaving my mother a widow with 2 young daughters and a mortgage she couldn't afford on her receptionist salary. I still remember his laugh, big and booming, filling our small house like sunshine. It's one of the few memories I have of him that hasn't faded with time. Mom fell apart after Dad died. Who could blame her? The love of her life was gone, leaving her with a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old to raise alone. Grief does strange things to people. For some, it makes them stronger. For my mother, it made her desperate. Enter Daniel, my stepfather. He swept into our lives 18 months after Dad died. A pharmaceutical sales rep with a nice car and a ready smile. Mom married him 6 months after they met. I remember standing in a scratchy blue junior bridesmaid dress, watching my mother promise forever to a man who barely knew our names. For a while, things were okay. Daniel wasn't particularly interested in being a father to me, but he wasn't cruel either. He mostly existed in our peripheral vision, coming and going on sales trips, bringing home takeout when he remembered we existed. The real change came when my half-sister Natalie was born 2 years later. Suddenly, there was a golden child in the house. Daniel doted on his biological daughter in ways he never bothered with me or my younger sister Claire. Mom, desperate to keep her new marriage intact, followed his lead. Before long, our family had silently reorganized itself around Natalie's wants and needs. I'm not saying they neglected us exactly. We had food, clothes, a roof over our heads. But there's a difference between providing the basics and making someone feel valued. Claire and I existed in the shadows of our redesigned family, while Natalie stood in the spotlight. Don't get me wrong, I love my little sister. None of this was her fault. She was just a child growing up in the environment created by our parents. But watching your mother light up when your half-sister enters a room, while barely acknowledging your existence, that leaves marks on a person. I threw myself into school, determined to create a future where I wouldn't need anyone's approval or support. I graduated high school with a full scholarship to Washington State University, double majored in finance and computer science, and landed an internship at a tech startup that turned into a full-time position after graduation. By 25, I was making more money than either of my parents ever had. By 27, I had bought my first condo in downtown Seattle. I worked 60-hour weeks, dated occasionally but never seriously, and visited my family for obligatory holidays where I smiled through Daniel's subtle jabs about career women and my mother's not-so-subtle hints about my biological clock. What my family didn't know, what I never told them, was that I knew the truth about our family home in the suburbs, the one we'd moved into when I was 16, after Daniel got a big promotion. The house had actually belonged to my father's parents. My grandparents had left it to me in their will, with the stipulation that ownership would transfer when I turned 25. They had wanted me to have something from my father, something no one could take away. When my grandmother's lawyer called on my 25th birthday, I was shocked. I'd had no idea. All those years of my mother and Daniel acting like they were doing me some massive favor by letting me live under their roof, all while they were essentially squatting in a house that would eventually be mine. I'll never forget the evening I confronted my mother about it. It was during one of my rare visits home after Daniel had gone to bed. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about the house?" I asked quietly, watching her load the dishwasher. She froze, a dinner plate suspended midair. "What about the house?" that it belonged to Dad's parents, that it was left to me. The plate slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen tile. She didn't even look down. "Madeline, what are you planning to do?" Her voice was tight with panic. I was genuinely confused by her reaction. "Nothing, Mom. You and Daniel and the girls can keep living here. I'm not going to kick you out." The relief that washed over her face was immediate. She rushed to hug me, squeezing so tight I could smell the wine on her breath. "Thank you, honey. You've always been such a good girl." I should have seen it for what it was, the manipulation, the calculated display of emotion. But part of me was still that 10-year-old girl, desperate for her mother's approval. I'd just handed her a get-out-of-jail-free card, and she'd clutched it like a lifeline. Looking back, that moment was the foundation for everything that would eventually crumble. I'd established a pattern. I had something my family needed, and rather than acknowledge that fact with gratitude, they would come to see it as their right. After college, Claire followed in my footsteps, working hard and building her own life, in Portland as a graphic designer. But Natalie? She was 22 now and still lived at home. She'd been drifting in and out of community college programs for 4 years, never quite committing to anything. Mom and Daniel fully supported her, finding herself, which apparently involved expensive shopping trips, music festivals, and a rotating door of boyfriends. I kept my distance as much as possible, limiting visits to holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner. But I couldn't completely escape the family dynamic. 2 years ago, when Natalie's car died, Mom called me in tears about how her baby needed reliable transportation for school. Before I knew it, I was co-signing on a new Honda. For a sister who didn't even bother to thank me properly. 6 months later, it was Natalie's tuition that needed covering, because Daniel had some unexpected medical bills. Then it was her credit card debt, because she didn't understand how interest worked, poor thing. Each time, I told myself it would be the last. Each time, I convinced myself I was being a good sister, a good daughter. Each time, the gratitude became more sparse, the expectation more pronounced. Claire saw it happening. During one of our rare sister-only brunches, she tried to warn me. "Maddie, you know they're using you, right?" she said, stirring her mimosa. "It's never going to stop unless you make it stop." "They're family," I replied automatically. "It's not that simple." Claire gave me a look I'll never forget, part pity, part frustration. Family doesn't mean being someone's ATM. Dad wouldn't have wanted this for you. I changed the subject, but her words stayed with me. Would my father have wanted me to be financially drained by the family that had so quickly replaced him? Would he have wanted me to be valued only for what I could provide? The question lingered, but I pushed it aside, until last spring, when everything finally came to a head. It was an ordinary Tuesday when my life began unraveling. I had stopped by my family's house, technically my house, though I never brought that up, for our monthly dinner. These dinners were a tradition Mom had instituted after I moved out, her way of keeping the family connected. In reality, they were often thinly veiled opportunities to ask for money or favors, but I kept showing up out of some misplaced sense of duty. I had barely hung up my jacket when Natalie burst through the front door, squealing at a pitch that would make dogs cover their ears. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" She was literally jumping up and down in the entryway, her left hand extended to display a glittering diamond ring that caught the light with every bounce. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was happening, and everything in me wanted to turn around and walk straight back out the door. But it was too late. Mom had emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up as she spotted the ring. "He proposed?" she gasped, rushing forward to grab Natalie's hand. Natalie nodded so hard I was concerned for her neck muscles. "Ryan asked me this afternoon. We're getting married in September." Ryan was Natalie's boyfriend of 11 months, a nice enough guy who worked as a sales associate at a luxury car dealership. I'd met him twice and found him pleasant, if somewhat ambitious. He clearly adored Natalie, though whether he understood what he was getting himself into was another question, entirely. September? That's only 6 months away, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's not much time to plan a wedding. Neither of them seemed to hear me. They were already discussing venues and flowers and guest lists, their voices overlapping in their excitement. The Waterside Hotel has that gorgeous ballroom, Mom was saying. Remember Cousin Jessica's wedding there 3 years ago? Yes, with the crystal chandeliers and the view of the bay. Natalie clapped her hands together. It's perfect. Having been to Cousin Jessica's wedding, I knew exactly how expensive the Waterside Hotel was. My unease deepened. Congratulations, Nat, I managed to say when there was finally a break in their back and forth. That's really exciting news. Natalie barely glanced at me. Thanks. Oh, and Mom, I was thinking about flowers. Remember those amazing arrangements at the Peterson wedding, with the orchids and the hanging crystals? And just like that, I was forgotten again. Daniel arrived home shortly after, and the excitement played out all over again. He beamed with pride, clapping Ryan on the shoulder and immediately suggesting they celebrate with the expensive scotch he kept for special occasions. To my little girl and her future husband, Daniel toasted, raising his glass. May your marriage be blessed with all the happiness in the world, and maybe a grandchild or two for us in the near future. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile and sipped my drink, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Natalie. I was. But a sense of foreboding had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Dinner was entirely dominated by wedding talk, the venue, the dress, the honeymoon possibilities. Through it all, I noticed something concerning. No one was mentioning costs. No one was talking budgets. It was as if money was no object, which I knew wasn't the case for my parents. Have you two discussed a budget yet? I finally asked during a brief lull in the conversation. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from confusion to annoyance. Budget? Natalie wrinkled her nose like I'd suggested she get married in a paper bag. Why would we limit ourselves with a budget? This is the biggest day of my life, Madeline. Because weddings are expensive, I replied, keeping my voice level. Really expensive. It's good to know what you can realistically afford before you start making plans. Oh, honey, Mom said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Don't worry about that now. This is a time for dreams, not spreadsheets. Daniel chuckled. Always. The practical one, aren't you, Madeline? Some things are worth spending on. My daughter's wedding is one of them. I let it drop, but as the evening continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that a train was coming, and somehow, I was going to end up tied to the tracks. By the time I left that night, Natalie had already decided on a bridal party of 8 girls. All my closest friends from college, a live band for the reception, and custom-designed invitations. Mom was talking about flying to New York to visit bridal salons, like on that TV show. As I drove back to my condo, I couldn't help running mental calculations. The Waterside Hotel, a designer dress, a live band. This wedding was already shaping up to cost more than my first year's salary. It's not your problem, I told my reflection, in the rearview mirror. Not your circus, not your monkeys. But deep down, I knew better. In my family, financial problems had a way of becoming my problems, whether I wanted them to or not. The next 2 weeks passed in relative peace. I threw myself into work, focusing on a major project that kept me at the office until late most evenings. When my mind wandered to Natalie's wedding, I firmly redirected it. Not my problem. Not yet, anyway. Then, on a Saturday morning when I was enjoying the rare luxury of sleeping in, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but guilt, my constant companion, pushed me to answer. "Madeline, darling." Mom's voice had that syrupy quality it took on when she wanted something. "Are you busy today? Natalie and I were hoping you could join us for lunch. There's something important we want to discuss with you." My stomach clenched. "What's it about?" "Oh, just some wedding details. Nothing to worry about. How about Café Lucille at 1? Café Lucille was an upscale bistro downtown, the kind of place with $20 salads and no prices on the wine list. If they were trying to soften me up for something, they were being obvious about it." "Fine," I agreed, already regretting it. "I'll see you at 1. When I arrived at the restaurant, Mom and Natalie were already seated at a corner table, an open bottle of champagne between them. Not a good sign. "There she is!" Mom stood to kiss my cheek, her perfume enveloping me in a cloud of jasmine. "We've ordered mimosas for the table. It's a celebration after all." I slid into my seat, noticing the glossy wedding magazines spread across the table, several pages marked with colorful sticky notes. Natalie was practically vibrating with excitement, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. "So?" I said after a server had filled my champagne flute and taken our lunch orders. "What did you want to discuss?" Mom and Natalie exchanged a look that sent warning bells clanging in my head. "Well," Mom began, her voice carefully modulated, "we've been doing some planning for the wedding. Natalie has such wonderful ideas, and everything is coming together beautifully." "That's great," I said cautiously. "The thing is," Natalie jumped in, unable to contain herself, "the Waterside only had one date available in September, and we had to book it immediately or lose it. So we put down the deposit yesterday." "Congratulations," I said, still not seeing the issue. "I'm glad you got the venue you wanted." Another look passed between them. Mom took a large sip of her mimosa. "The Waterside is quite exclusive," she continued. The deposit was substantial, and there are so many other expenses coming up. The dress, the flowers, the photographer. And there it was, the real reason for this lunch. "How much?" I asked flatly. "Well, we've put together a complete budget," Natalie said, pulling a folded paper from her purse. "Everything included." She slid the paper across the table. I opened it slowly, bracing myself. Even prepared, the number at the bottom made me choke on my champagne. $75,000? I sputtered, sure I had misread. "That can't be right." "It's actually quite reasonable for a wedding of this caliber," Mom said defensively. "Cousin Jessica's was over $100,000. I scanned the itemized list, each line making me more lightheaded than the last. $20,000 for the venue, $15,000 for catering, $8,000 for the dress, $10,000 for flowers and decorations. The list went on and on. "This is insane," I said, looking up at their expectant faces. "You can't seriously be planning to spend this much on a one-day event." Natalie's lower lip jutted out in the pout that had been getting her way since childhood. "It's my wedding day, Madeline, the most important day of my life. Don't you want me to have the perfect day?" "Of course I want you to have a nice wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But this is beyond nice. This is excessive. Frankly, it's irresponsible." "Irresponsible?" Mom's voice rose slightly. "What's irresponsible about wanting to give my daughter the wedding of her dreams?" "What's irresponsible is planning a wedding you can't afford," I countered. "Unless there's some family fortune I don't know about?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I looked back down at the budget, reality dawning on me with sickening clarity. "You're expecting me to pay for this," I said. It wasn't a question. "Not all of it," Natalie said quickly. "Ryan's parents are contributing $15,000, and Dad and Mom are putting in $20,000. I did the math. "That leaves $40,000. Where exactly do you think that's coming from?" "Well," Mom shifted in her seat, We know you're doing so well at your job. That promotion last year, the bonus you mentioned at Christmas. Us? Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You've already booked a venue you can't afford for a wedding that's completely out of your price range, and you just assumed I would cover the difference? Without even discussing it with me first? We're discussing it now, Natalie said, as if that made it all better. This isn't a discussion, I replied. This is an ambush. Mom reached across the table to pat my hand. Sweetheart, we know it's a lot to ask, but family supports each other. And you're always saying how you want to help Natalie succeed in life. What better way than to give her the perfect start to her marriage? I pulled my hand away. There are many better ways. Helping with a down payment on a house, contributing to a retirement fund, paying off her student loans. All of those would be more meaningful long-term investments in her future than blowing $40,000 on a single day. It's not just any day. Natalie's voice had taken on the whiny quality I remembered from her teenage tantrums. It's my wedding day. Don't you care about me at all? And there it was, the emotional manipulation I should have seen coming from a mile away. In my family, money and love were so entangled it was impossible to separate them. Saying no to financial requests wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was interpreted as a rejection of the person themselves. I do care about you, I said carefully, which is why I'm suggesting more responsible ways to use that kind of money. So you're saying no? Mom's voice was cold now, all pretense of celebration gone. You're refusing to help your own sister? I took a deep breath. I'm saying I won't contribute $40,000 to this wedding. It's excessive and financially irresponsible. If you want to plan something more reasonable, within a budget that makes sense, I'd be happy to help in some way. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. You're ruining everything. We already put down the non-refundable deposit. We can't change venues now. That was your choice, I pointed out. You made that decision without consulting me, knowing you couldn't afford it. I thought I could count on you, Natalie sobbed, mascara streaming down her cheeks. You're just jealous because you're almost 30 and no one wants to marry you. The barbs stung more than I cared to admit. My recent breakup with Michael after 3 years together was still a raw wound. He'd ended things because I was too focused on work and not ready to build a life together. Ironic, considering how much of my energy went into supporting my family instead of my relationship. That's enough, I said, standing up. I'm not having this conversation anymore. When you're ready to discuss a reasonable budget based on what you can actually afford, let me know. If you walk out now, Mom said, her voice trembling with anger, don't bother coming to the wedding at all. In fact, Natalie was going to ask you to be a bridesmaid, but clearly you don't care enough about her happiness to be included. I looked at my sister, whose tears had mysteriously dried the moment the bridesmaid card was played. Is that true, Nat? You're cutting me out of your wedding party because I won't bankroll your extravagance? Natalie lifted her chin defiantly. If you really loved me, you'd want to help make my day special. But fine. I'll ask Claire instead. At least she understands what family means. The irony was almost laughable. Claire, who had been warning me for years about our family's financial exploitation. Claire, who had refused to co-sign for Natalie's car or pay off her credit cards. Claire, who had established the very boundaries I was only now finding the courage to set. Good luck with that, I said, dropping enough cash on the table to cover my untouched lunch. And good luck with the wedding. I hope it's everything you've dreamed of, but it won't be funded by me. As I walked out of the restaurant, my phone was already buzzing with texts from both of them. I turned it off without reading them. For the first time in my adult life, I had said no to my family's financial demands. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. But I knew this wasn't the end of the battle. With my family, it never was. The drive home from Café Lucille was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and the Seattle skyline wavered through the tears I refused to let fall. By the time I reached my condo, my phone had died from the constant barrage of notifications. A blessing in disguise, really. I poured myself a generous glass of Cabernet and stepped out onto my small balcony overlooking the city. The afternoon sun filtered through the clouds in that uniquely Seattle way, casting everything in a gentle, muted light. 15 floors up, the world seemed smaller, more manageable. I took a deep breath of the crisp spring air and felt something settle inside me. The quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. Of course, doing the right thing and surviving the consequences are two different matters entirely. When I finally plugged in my phone that evening, the notifications were overwhelming. 17 text messages, 5 voicemails, and multiple missed calls from both Mom and Natalie. I scrolled through the texts first, watching the tone evolve from guilt-tripping. How could you do this to your sister? To manipulation? If you really loved us? To outright anger? You're dead to me. The voicemails were worse. Mom's voice trembled with that particular brand of martyred outrage she'd perfected over the years. I just don't understand how we raise such a selfish daughter, she said in the third message. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By ruining your sister's special day? I'm devastated, Madeline. Absolutely heartbroken. What exactly had they done for me? The question echoed in my mind as I deleted the messages one by one. They had lived rent-free in my house for years. I had paid off Natalie's credit cards, co-signed her car loan, covered several semesters of her ever-changing college pursuits. The mental ledger was decidedly unbalanced, yet somehow I was the villain in this scenario. I muted my notifications and sent a single text to Claire. Just said no to funding Nat's wedding. World War III has officially begun. Claire's response came seconds later. Finally. Want me to come over? I have wine and chocolate and zero sympathy for any of them. I smiled for the first time all day. Rain check? Need some alone time to process. You got it. Call if you need backup. Proud of you, sis. That simple affirmation, proud of you, brought fresh tears to my eyes. When was the last time anyone in my family had expressed pride in me? Not for what I could provide, but for who I was. The next week passed in blessed silence. I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office, hit the gym aggressively, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. By Friday, I had almost convinced myself the worst was over. Perhaps they'd realized I was serious. Perhaps they were revising their plans to something more reasonable. Then my doorbell rang at 7:30 Saturday morning. I stumbled to the door in my pajamas, expecting a delivery or a neighbor with a package. Instead, I found Daniel standing in my hallway, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and slacks. His Sunday best, reserved for church and important business meetings. Madeline, he nodded stiffly. May I come in? We need to talk. I hesitated, then stepped aside. In all my years of family drama, Daniel had rarely inserted himself directly. He usually stayed on the periphery, letting Mom handle the emotional heavy lifting while he nodded in agreement. His presence on my doorstep alone was unprecedented. Coffee? I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. No, thank you. This won't take long. We sat awkwardly in my living room, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been my condo's main selling point. Daniel looked around appraisingly, no doubt mentally calculating the value of my furniture, my art, my life. Your mother is very upset, he began without preamble. I gathered that from the voicemails. He shifted in his seat. Look, Madeline, I understand you might feel put upon. The wedding budget is substantial. But Natalie deserves the best, and as her sister, you should want that for her too. I do want the best for Natalie, I said carefully. But there's a difference between the best and financially irresponsible. $75,000. For a wedding is excessive, especially for two young people just starting out. Daniel waved a dismissive hand. It's just money. You have plenty. That's not the point. And frankly, my financial situation isn't relevant. The issue is the expectation, the assumption that I would cover this without even being consulted. "Oh, you're being consulted now," he countered, as if showing up at my door days after the venue had been booked somehow counted as prior consultation. "The deposit has already been paid," I pointed out. "Contracts have been signed. That's not consultation, that's coercion." Daniel's expression hardened. "I've always tried to be fair to you, Madeline. Even though you're not my biological daughter, I've treated you as family." The unspoken, "unlike how you're treating Natalie," hung in the air between us. "I appreciate that," I said, though in truth, his treatment had always made it abundantly clear that I was an outsider, a remnant of my mother's previous life. "Then show some appreciation," he said, leaning forward. "This wedding means everything. To your mother. To see her little girl walk down the aisle. It would break her heart if it couldn't happen the way Natalie deserves." "And what about my heart?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Does anyone care that I'm being treated like an ATM rather than a family member? That the only time anyone calls me is when they need money?" Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. "That's not true. We invited you to Thanksgiving last year." The fact that he had to reach back 5 months for an example only proved my point. "Let me be clear," I said, standing up. "I will not be contributing $40,000 to Natalie's wedding. Not now, not ever. If you need to scale back the plans, that's unfortunate, but it's the reality of the situation." Daniel stood as well, his face flushing with anger. "Your father would be ashamed of you." The blow landed precisely where it was intended. My father, a kind, generous man who had always put family first. Would he see my refusal as selfishness? Or would he recognize the pattern of exploitation that had developed in his absence? My father taught me the value of hard work and financial responsibility, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. He wouldn't want me to enable financial irresponsibility even in the name of family. "You've changed," Daniel said, shaking his head. "Success has made you cold, unfeeling." "No, Daniel. I've just finally started valuing myself as much as I've always valued everyone else in this family." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. I sank back onto the couch, exhausted despite the early hour. The invocation of my father's memory, wielded like a weapon to wound me where I was most vulnerable, felt like a new low, even for them. I reached for my phone and called the one person who had known my father as well as I had. "Uncle James, it's Madeline. Do you have time to meet for lunch today? There's something I need to ask you." Uncle James was my father's younger brother. Unlike the rest of the family, he had maintained a relationship with me after Dad died, though our contact had become less frequent over the years as he moved to Portland for work. He was the only person left who could tell me with any authority what my father would have thought about all this. We met at a quiet bistro near Pike Place Market, the kind of place locals go to avoid tourists. James looked good for his 55 years, still fit, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, his smile as warm as I remembered. "Maddie," he hugged me tight. "It's been too long." Over lunch, I told him everything, the wedding, the expectations Daniel's visit that morning. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as the story unfolded. "And then he said Dad would be ashamed of me," I finished, pushing my half-eaten salad around the plate. "And I need to know. Would he be?" Uncle James was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Your father was the most generous man I've ever known," he said finally. "He would give someone the shirt off his back if they needed it." But there was a difference between generosity and being taken advantage of. David could tell the difference, and he had no patience for users. He reached across the table and took my hand. "The last conversation I had with your dad, about a week before he died, was about you. He told me how proud he was of your independence, your determination. He said, 'James, that girl is going to move mountains someday, and she'll do it on her own terms.'" Tears welled in my eyes. "He would not want you to be anyone's bank account," James continued firmly. "He would want you to be respected, appreciated, loved for who you are, not what you can provide. And if your mother and Daniel can't do that, he would tell you to walk away without a backward glance." The weight that had been pressing on my chest since Daniel's visit lifted slightly. "Thank you," I whispered. I needed to hear that. "Why, don't you tell me about you now?" James said, his eyes kind. "Not the family drama. Tell me about your life, your work, what makes you happy." For the next hour, we talked about everything else. My job, my friends, my volunteer work teaching financial literacy to teenage girls in underserved communities. James told me about his life in Portland, his recent retirement, his plans to travel. It was the first conversation I'd had in months that didn't revolve around family obligations or expectations. As we said goodbye, James hugged me again. "Don't be a stranger, Maddie. You're always welcome to visit me in Portland. And remember, you're David's daughter through and through. Trust your instincts." I drove home feeling lighter, more certain of my decision. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. What came next, as it turned out, was escalation. Sunday morning, I was awakened by a call from a number I didn't recognize. Half asleep, I answered. "Madeline Bennett?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Shannon Williams from Seattle Wedding Guide. I'm calling to follow up on the vendor recommendations for the Bennett Caruso wedding. I've been working with your mother and sister, but they mentioned you're handling the financial aspects." I sat up so quickly my head spun. "Excuse me?" "The deposits for the florist and the band are due this week," Shannon continued, oblivious to my confusion. "And we'll need to schedule a tasting with the caterer. Your mother mentioned you prefer email for payment details, so I sent those over yesterday, but I haven't received a confirmation." The audacity was breathtaking. After my explicit refusal, they had given my name and contact information to wedding vendors as the financial point person. "Ms. Williams," I said, keeping my voice as level as possible, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. I am not involved in planning or paying for my sister's wedding." "Oh." She sounded taken aback. But Mrs. Bennett specifically said, "I understand, and I apologize for the confusion. But my mother was mistaken. Any financial arrangements will need to go through the bride and groom or their parents directly." "I see." Her voice cooled noticeably. "Well, I'll have to reach out to them again. The deposits are non-refundable and due within 48 hours, or the date will be released to other clients." "I understand. That's between you and them. Have a good day." I hung up and immediately called my mother. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring. "Madeline, thank goodness. We were just talking about—" "Did you give my contact information to the wedding planner as the person handling payments?" I cut her off, my voice shaking with anger. A pause. "Well, we thought if you spoke directly with Shannon, you might understand better why." "How dare you?" I said, each word precise and sharp as a blade. "After I explicitly told you I will not be paying for this wedding, you gave my information to vendors? Were you hoping they would pressure me into covering costs, or were you planning to forge my signature on payment authorizations?" "Madeline, How could you even suggest such a thing? Mom's voice rose in indignation. We would never. You already did, I pointed out. You told this woman I was handling the financial aspects without my knowledge or consent. That's fraud, Mom. It is not fraud to assume your daughter will help her family, she snapped. It's called being part of a family, something you clearly don't understand anymore. I understand perfectly. I understand that you and Daniel have created a situation where Natalie believes she's entitled to anything she wants, regardless of cost or reality. I understand that you see my financial success as a resource to be exploited rather than the result of hard work and sacrifice. And I understand that you have no respect for my boundaries or autonomy. That's not fair, Mom protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. What's not fair is being manipulated and guilt-tripped every time I set a reasonable boundary. What's not fair is having my father's memory used against me as an emotional weapon. What's not fair is being valued only for my checkbook. That's not true. We love you. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for money, not to complain about something, just to check in and see how I'm doing. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. That's what I thought, I said quietly. I need to go now. Please don't give my contact information to any more vendors. And tell Natalie that if she wants to discuss a reasonable wedding budget that doesn't involve my financial contribution, I'm willing to have that conversation. Otherwise, we have nothing more to talk about. I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. Part of me expected my phone to immediately ring again, for the battle to continue. Instead, silence. Complete and utter silence that stretched into days, then weeks. April turned to May. Spring bloomed across Seattle in explosions of cherry blossoms and tulips. Work kept me busy, and on the weekends, I explored parts of the city I'd never made time for before. Small art galleries, hidden bookstores, farmers markets teeming with local produce and artisanal goods. Claire called every few days, keeping me updated on the family situation. According to her, Mom and Daniel were scrambling to figure out how to pay for the wedding they'd already committed to. Deposits had been lost, vendors informed of scaling back. Natalie was reportedly devastated, blaming me entirely for ruining her dream wedding. She's telling everyone who will listen that you promised to pay for everything and then backed out. At the last minute, Claire reported during one of our calls. The victim narrative is strong with this one. Let her talk, I said, surprised by how little it bothered me. Anyone who knows me knows that's not true. Ryan's parents are pissed, apparently, Claire continued. They committed their entire savings based on the understanding that our side was covering the rest. Now they're on the hook for more than they can afford. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Ryan's parents, caught in the crossfire of my family's dysfunction. They could always scale back to something reasonable, I pointed out. No one's forcing them to go ahead with this budget. Try telling that to Natalie, Claire snorted. Reason and logic aren't exactly her strong suits. The weeks of silence from Mom and Natalie stretched into a month. May became June. The weather warmed, and Seattle shook off the last remnants of winter gloom. I settled into a new normal, one where I wasn't constantly anticipating the next financial crisis or emotional ambush from my family. It was liberating. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, joined a hiking group that explored the Cascade foothills on weekends, even went on a few dates. For the first time in years, my life felt like my own. Then, one evening in mid-June, my intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I answered with caution. Yes? Maddie, it's me. Can I come up? Natalie's voice. My finger hovered over the button that would unlock the building's entrance. After a moment's hesitation, I pressed it. 15th floor, end of the hall, I said, then hung up. I spent the 5 minutes it took her to reach my condo frantically straightening up, more out of ingrained habit than any real concern for her opinion. When the knock came, I took a deep breath before opening the door. Natalie stood in the hallway looking smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. Her normally perfect makeup was subdued, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression uncertain. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I stepped aside, motioning her toward the living room. She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Would you like something to drink?" I offered, falling back on politeness in the absence of knowing what else to say. She shook her head. "I'm fine." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a long moment. Outside my windows, the sun was setting over Puget Sound, painting the sky in dramatic streaks of orange and pink. Finally, Natalie spoke. "Ryan and I broke up." Of all the things I had expected her to say, this wasn't on the list. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my sister to be unhappy. "What happened?" Natalie stared down at her hands. "The wedding. It all fell apart. We lost deposits, had to cancel vendors. Ryan's parents were furious about the money they'd already spent. We started fighting all the time. He said I was being unreasonable, that we should just have a small ceremony at his parents' beach house." I waited, sensing there was more. "Then last week, he found out I'd charged $5,000 on his credit card for the photographer's deposit after you refused to pay. He said he couldn't marry someone he couldn't trust with finances." I closed my eyes briefly. The scenario was so predictable it would have been funny if it weren't so sad. "I'm truly sorry, Nat," I said gently. "Breakups are painful, no matter the circumstances." "Are you?" She looked up, her eyes suddenly flashing with anger. "Are you really sorry? Because if you had just helped like we asked, none of this would have happened. We'd still be together, planning our perfect day. Instead, everything's ruined." And there it was, the real purpose of her visit. Not reconciliation, not genuine connection, but another attempt to lay her problems at my feet. "Natalie," I said carefully, "I didn't break up your engagement. Ryan did because he discovered you were being financially dishonest with him. That's not my responsibility. You could have prevented it by enabling behavior that was already problematic enough to end your relationship. That wouldn't have been doing you any favors." She stood up abruptly, pacing across my living room. "You don't understand. You've never understood what it's like to be me." "What does that mean?" "To be the youngest. To have everyone expecting me to live up to you and Claire. Perfect Madeline with her scholarship and her high-powered job. Responsible Claire with her career and her apartment in Portland. Meanwhile, I'm just struggling to figure out who I am." For the first time, I glimpsed something real beneath Natalie's carefully cultivated persona. A genuine insecurity, a fear of inadequacy. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it a little better. "Nat, no one expects you to be me or Claire. We just want you to be an independent adult who takes responsibility for her choices." "Like charging wedding expenses to your fiancé's credit card without permission?" she said with a bitter laugh. "Yeah, I really nailed that one." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. "Not your finest moment, I'll grant you that." To my surprise, she smiled back, small and watery, but genuine. For just a moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, before the years of preferential treatment had molded her into someone who expected the world to bend to her wishes. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, sinking back onto the sofa. "I moved out of Ryan's apartment. I can't go back to Mom and Dad's. They're so disappointed in me. and I can't afford a place of my own with my part-time job. I recognized the opening for what it was. Another request for financial assistance, though at least this time it was direct rather than manipulative. Part of me wanted to immediately offer help, to fall back into the familiar pattern of solving Natalie's problems for her, but I knew that would only perpetuate the dynamic that had brought us to this point. "What are your options?" I asked instead. She looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what solutions have you considered? Could you get a full-time job? Find roommates? Move to a less expensive area?" Natalie blinked, as if the concept of solving her own problems was entirely foreign to her. Perhaps it was. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. "Maybe that's a good place to start then," I suggested. "Think about what you want your life to look like and what steps you can take to get there. Steps that don't involve depending on others financially." She nodded slowly. "I guess I could look for a better job. My friend Melissa has been trying to get me to apply at her marketing firm for months." "That sounds like a good first step." Natalie bit her lip, looking around my condo with new eyes. "How did you do it? Build all this for yourself?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was difficult to answer, but because it was the first time Natalie had ever expressed interest in my life or journey. "One step at a time," I said honestly. "I set goals, worked hard to achieve them, lived below my means, saved aggressively. It wasn't glamorous or exciting most of the time. There were a lot of nights of ramen noodles and cheap wine while my friends were out at expensive restaurants." "Doesn't sound like much fun," she said with a small frown. "It wasn't, always. But financial independence is worth the temporary sacrifices." Natalie was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. Then she straightened her shoulders slightly. Would you be willing to help me figure out a budget? Not giving me money," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just teaching me how to manage what I have better." It was such a small request, yet so significant. The first time she had ever asked for my knowledge rather than my wallet. "I'd be happy to," I said, meaning it. "Why don't we set up a time next week? In the meantime, you could start tracking your spending, everything from coffee to rent, so we have a clear picture of where your money is going." "Okay," she nodded, looking both nervous and determined. "I can do that." As she stood to leave, there was an awkward moment where neither of us quite knew how to say goodbye. Then, impulsively, I stepped forward and hugged her. She stiffened in surprise before relaxing into the embrace. "It's going to be okay, Nat," I said softly. "Not right away, maybe, but eventually." She pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "Thanks for not slamming the door in my face. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had." After she left, I stood at my window watching the last colors of sunset fade from the sky, feeling cautiously optimistic. One conversation wouldn't undo years of dysfunctional family dynamics, but it was a start, a small step toward a healthier relationship with my sister. Mom and Daniel were another matter entirely. The wound there felt deeper, the breach more fundamental. I wasn't sure if or when that relationship could be repaired, or what it would look like if it was. But for now, I had done something I'd never truly done before. I had put myself first, set a boundary, and held firm despite the emotional cost. In doing so, I had discovered something important. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. My father would indeed have been proud. July arrived with a heat wave that blanketed Seattle in uncharacteristic humidity. My condo's air conditioning worked overtime as temperatures climbed into the 90s, making the city feel like a steam room. I was grateful for the climate-controlled sanctuary of my office, where I spent most days focused on our company's upcoming product launch. The tentative peace with Natalie had held through June. We'd met twice to go over her finances, sessions that were equal parts enlightening and disturbing. My sister had no concept of budgeting, saving, or delayed gratification. Her credit score was abysmal, her spending habits chaotic. 3 different credit cards were maxed out, and she'd been making minimum payments for years, seemingly unaware of the astronomical interest rates she was paying. "How did you never learn any of this?" I asked during our second session, genuinely puzzled. We'd grown up in the same household, after all. Natalie shrugged, fidgeting with her water glass. "Mom and Dad always handled everything for me. When I needed money, they gave it to me. When they couldn't, you did. I never had to think about it." The simple honesty of her response was both refreshing and troubling. She wasn't being deliberately irresponsible. She'd simply never been taught otherwise. In fact, she'd been actively taught dependency. "Well, we're changing that now," I said, outlining a 6-month plan to get her debt under control. To my surprise, Natalie had embraced the challenge with unexpected determination. She'd applied for and gotten the full-time position at her friend's marketing firm. She'd found a modest studio apartment with a manageable rent. She'd even started bringing lunch from home instead of eating out every day, a small change that would save her thousands over the course of a year. "I actually kind of like it," she admitted during our last meeting. "Knowing where my money is going, feeling like I'm in control for once." It was a promising start, though I remained cautiously optimistic. Changing lifelong habits takes more than a few weeks of good intentions. My relationship with Mom and Daniel, however, remained fractured. They hadn't reached out since Natalie's engagement ended, and I hadn't attempted contact either. Through Claire, I heard snippets about their lives. Dad considering early retirement, Mom joining some expensive country club despite their financial concerns. It seemed they were carrying on as usual, perhaps believing that the rift with me was temporary, that I would eventually come around as I always had before. They were wrong. The third weekend in July marked Uncle James's 60th birthday. He'd invited family and friends to a celebration at his home in Portland, and I'd immediately RSVP'd yes. Claire was driving down from Seattle with me, turning it into a sister's road trip. Natalie had been invited too, but had declined, citing work obligations. The real reason, I suspected, was that she wasn't ready to face the extended family after the broken engagement drama. What Uncle James hadn't mentioned, and what I discovered only when Claire and I pulled into his driveway, was that Mom and Daniel had also been invited. Their familiar sedan was parked near the front door, impossible to miss. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, considering my options. We could turn around, make up some excuse about car trouble. We could sit here until I calmed down enough to face them. Or we could act like adults and handle an awkward social situation with grace. "You okay?" Claire asked, reaching over to squeeze my arm. "We can leave if you want." I took a deep breath. No, I'm not giving them the power to chase me away from family events. Uncle James deserves to have us all here for his birthday. Claire nodded, her expression proud. That's my big sister, always the brave one. We gathered our overnight, bags and the carefully wrapped gift we'd chosen together, a vintage record player and a selection of vinyl albums from Uncle James's favorite jazz artists. As we approached the front door, I could hear laughter and conversation flowing from the backyard. The sound of shared joy, of normal family interaction, made my heart ache with a complicated mix of longing and apprehension. James's husband, Michael, answered the door, greeting us with warm hugs. "The birthday boy is holding court in the garden," he said, ushering us inside. "Everyone's already here. Perfect timing." Everyone meaning. I let the question hang. Michael's expression softened with understanding. "Your mom and Daniel arrived about an hour ago. They're being civil, I promise. James gave them a talking to about behavior expectations." I couldn't help but smile at the image of gentle Uncle James laying down the law. Well, if James vouches for them, I suppose I can manage a few hours of polite conversation. "That's the spirit," Michael said, guiding us through the house toward the back door. And if all else fails, I've made sangria strong enough to numb even the most awkward family reunion. The backyard had been transformed into a garden party paradise. Paper lanterns hung from tree branches, tables draped in white linen held. Platters of food and comfortable seating areas were arranged across the lawn. About 20 people mingled in small groups, drinks in hand, the atmosphere relaxed and festive. Uncle James spotted us immediately, breaking away from a conversation to engulf us in hugs. "My favorite nieces, you made it." "Happy birthday, Uncle James," I said, handing over our gift. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world." "This looks amazing," Claire added, gesturing around the garden. "Michael outdid himself." "He always does," James said fondly, looking toward his husband with obvious adoration even after 30 years together. "Now, let me introduce you to everyone. Some of my old college friends are here, and cousins from Michael's side you haven't met yet." As James led us through the crowd, making introductions, I scanned the garden for Mom and Daniel. I spotted them near the buffet table, Mom in an expensive-looking summer dress, Daniel in khakis and a button-down shirt. They were engaged in conversation, with an elderly couple I didn't recognize, seemingly at ease. "They're Michael's parents," James murmured, following my gaze. "Lovely people, very chatty. Your mother and Daniel will be occupied for at least another half hour. Plenty of time for you to get some food and find a comfortable spot away from them." I squeezed his hand gratefully. "Thanks for the strategic seating arrangement. I may be 60, but I haven't forgotten how to manage family dynamics," he winked. "Now go enjoy yourselves. Dinner's in an hour, speeches after that, then cake and dancing. You only have to be in close proximity during the meal, and I've seated you at opposite ends of the table." Claire and I filled plates with gourmet finger foods and found a quiet corner of the garden where we could observe without being obvious about it. The sangria was indeed strong, just as Michael had promised, and I felt myself relaxing as the sweet, fruity wine worked its magic. "So," Claire said, popping an olive into her mouth, "what's the game plan here? Polite nods across the table? Brief hello and goodbye? Or are we going for complete avoidance?" "Basic civility," I decided. "I'm not going to make a scene at Uncle James's birthday, but I'm also not going to pretend everything's fine between us." Claire nodded approvingly. "Mature and reasonable. I like it." We managed to enjoy nearly an hour of peaceful mingling before the inevitable occurred. I was refilling my sangria when I felt a presence beside me. The familiar scent of my mother's perfume reached me before I turned. "Madeline," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound casual. "You look well." I turned slowly, taking in her appearance. She looked older somehow, the lines around her eyes more pronounced, her smile strained at the edges. "Thank you. So do you." An awkward silence stretched between us. Mom fidgeted with her bracelets, a nervous habit she'd had for as long as I could remember. "James and Michael have done a wonderful job with the party," she finally said. "The garden is beautiful." "It is," I agreed, searching for neutral topics. "Have you met Michael's parents? They seem lovely." "Oh yes, delightful people. They've been telling us about their recent trip to Italy. Daniel and I have always wanted to go." Another silence. I took a sip of sangria, wishing Uncle James would ring the dinner bell and save me from this excruciating small talk. "Natalie mentioned you've been helping her with financial planning," Mom said abruptly, her tone careful, probing. That's good of you." I raised an eyebrow, surprised that Natalie had shared our sessions with Mom. "She's working hard to get her finances in order. I'm proud of the changes she's making." Mom nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, she seems different lately. More responsible." "Amazing what can happen when people are allowed to face the consequences of their choices," I said before I could stop myself. "So much for basic civility." Mom's face flushed. "Madeline, I didn't come over here to argue. I thought we could at least be civil today for James's sake. I am being civil, I pointed out. I haven't mentioned the house, the wedding, or the way you and Daniel have treated me for the past decade. That seems pretty civil to me. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I see you're still holding on to your anger. It's not anger, Mom. It's clarity. There's a difference. Before she could respond, the dinner bell rang, saved by Uncle James's impeccable timing once again. Mom hesitated, then turned toward the long table being set up on the patio. We should continue this conversation another time, she said over her shoulder. When we're both calm? I bit back a retort about being perfectly calm, instead focusing on finding my assigned seat. True to his word, James had placed me at the opposite end of the table from Mom and Daniel. Claire sat beside me, with James's sister Elaine on my other side. The arrangement allowed me to enjoy the excellent meal without the strain of forced conversation with my mother. After dinner came speeches, heartfelt and often hilarious tributes to Uncle James from friends and family spanning 6 decades of his life. Michael's toast brought tears to everyone's eyes as he described falling in love with James in 1985, when such relationships faced even greater challenges than today. 40 years together, Michael concluded, raising his glass. And I'd sign up for 40 more in a heartbeat. Happy birthday to the love of my life, the kindest soul I've ever known. As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Mom watching me, her expression thoughtful. When our eyes met, she didn't look away, instead offering a small, tentative smile. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning my attention back to the celebration. Cake followed the speeches, a magnificent 3-tiered creation decorated with edible gold leaf and fresh berries. As plates were being passed around, Daniel appeared beside my chair, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "Madeline," he said stiffly, "could we speak privately for a moment?" Claire tensed beside me, ready to intervene if necessary. I placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's okay," I murmured, then looked up at Daniel. 5 minutes, in the front garden." Away from the festivity of the backyard, the front garden was quiet and dim, illuminated only by the porch light and the distant glow of street lamps. Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture rigid. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble, the words sounding rehearsed. "What I said about your father was inexcusable. I had no right to use his memory that way." I crossed my arms, waiting. When nothing further came, I raised an eyebrow. "That's it? You're sorry for the lowest blow, but not for anything else? Not for treating me like a walking checkbook for the past decade? Not for enabling Natalie's financial dependency? Not for living rent-free in my house while acting like you were doing me a favor?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Those are complicated issues." "No, they're really not," I said, surprising myself with my calm certainty. "They're actually quite simple. You and Mom created a family dynamic where I was valued for what I could provide, not for who I am. You taught Natalie that she was entitled to my financial support simply because we shared DNA. You consistently prioritized her wants over my needs." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, Daniel seemed to be genuinely listening. "The thing is," I continued, "I let it happen. I enabled it too, because I was desperate for Mom's approval, for your acceptance, for some sense of family connection after Dad died. But that's not healthy for any of us. It's certainly not what family should be." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering my words. Finally, he sighed, heavily. "Your mother and I have been doing some reflecting since the wedding situation. It hasn't been comfortable." "Growth rarely is," I said, thinking of Natalie's struggles to change her habits. "Natalie's different since she's been meeting with you," he admitted. "More independent, less entitled. She's even offered to start contributing to household expenses when she visits." That was news to me, but I felt a surge of pride in my sister. She's learning to stand on her own feet. It's what she should have been taught all along. Daniel nodded slowly. "Your mother misses you," he said quietly. "More than she'll admit. She keeps your graduation photo on her nightstand, you know. The one from college, where you're laughing at something off camera." The revelation caught me off guard. I remembered that day clearly. Uncle James had made a silly face behind the photographer, and I'd burst out laughing just as the shutter clicked. It was one of the few truly joyful moments from that period of my life. "I'm not the one who created this distance," I said finally. "And I'm not the only one who can bridge it." "No," Daniel agreed, surprising me again. "You're not. But perhaps we could start fresh? Not pretend the past didn't happen, but try to build something healthier going forward?" I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw something I'd rarely witnessed in my stepfather: vulnerability, and perhaps a glimmer of genuine regret. "I can't promise anything," I said honestly. "Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But I'm willing to try if you and Mom are genuinely committed to changing the dynamic between us." Daniel extended his hand, a formal gesture that felt oddly appropriate given our history. "That's all we can ask for." I shook his hand briefly, then turned back toward the party. "We should return before people notice we're missing. Uncle James deserves our full attention today." We walked back to the garden in silence, an unspoken truce established between us. As we rejoined the celebration, I caught Uncle James watching us with a knowing smile. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, and I couldn't help but wonder if this encounter had been part of his birthday plans all along. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of music, dancing, and laughter. I maintained a polite distance from Mom and Daniel, but the sharp edge of tension had dulled somewhat. When it came time to say goodbye, Mom approached me cautiously. "Madeline," she began, her voice uncertain. "Daniel mentioned you two had a conversation." "We did," I confirmed, neither encouraging nor discouraging further discussion. She twisted, her hands together nervously. "Would it be possible? That is, would you consider coming to dinner sometime, just to talk?" I considered the request carefully. "Not at the house," I said finally. "Somewhere neutral. A restaurant, perhaps." Relief flooded her face. "Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with." "And Claire should be there too," I added. "She's been caught in the middle of this situation for too long." Mom glanced over at Claire, who was helping Michael collect empty glasses. "Yes, you're right. The three of us should talk. Long overdue." We settled on dinner the following weekend at a restaurant halfway between Seattle and Portland, a compromise that would require equal effort from all parties. As Claire and I said our goodbyes and headed to our car, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. "That went better than expected," Claire commented as we pulled away from Uncle James's house. "No shouting, no tears, no dramatic exits. Very mature of us all." I smiled wryly. "The bar for success in our family is remarkably low, isn't it?" "Rock bottom," Claire agreed with a laugh. "So, this dinner next weekend? Are you really ready for that?" I considered the question as Seattle's lights appeared on the horizon. "Ready? I'm not sure. But necessary? Definitely. We can't keep going like this, pretending each other doesn't exist except at major family functions." "And you believe Mom and Daniel are sincere about wanting to change?" "I believe they're sincere about wanting me back in their lives," I said carefully. "Whether they're capable of the kind of fundamental change needed for a healthy relationship, that remains to be seen." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Just remember, you don't owe them forgiveness, and you don't have to accept any relationship that doesn't respect your boundaries." "When did my little sister get so wise?" I asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Learned from the best, she grinned. Now, can we talk about something more cheerful? Like that cute guy who kept trying to get your attention during the dancing? Michael's nephew, I think? I groaned, grateful for the change of subject. Please tell me you didn't give him my number. Of course not, Claire said innocently. I gave him your Instagram. The week leading up to the dinner with Mom passed in a flurry of work deadlines and preparation for our company's quarterly board meeting. The distraction was welcome, keeping my anxiety about the upcoming family reunion at bay. By Saturday evening, however, there was no more avoiding it. I met Claire at our hotel in Olympia, the midpoint we'd chosen for our dinner with Mom. We'd decided to make a weekend of it, booking a nice hotel and planning to explore the city on Sunday. If things went badly with Mom, at least we'd have a sister getaway to salvage the trip. Ready for this? Claire asked as we waited in the hotel lobby. Mom had texted that she was running 15 minutes late, a habit that had always irritated me but now seemed trivial compared to our larger issues. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, smoothing the front of my simple black dress. I'd chosen the outfit carefully, professional, put together, but not trying too hard. Armor in a way. When Mom finally arrived, she was alone. Daniel thought it would be better if it was just us, she explained as we walked to the restaurant across the street. He felt his presence might complicate things. It was surprisingly considerate of him, and I found myself nodding in approval. That was thoughtful. The restaurant was upscale but not pretentious, with well-spaced tables that afforded privacy for conversation. We ordered drinks, wine for Mom and Claire, sparkling water for me. I wanted to keep a clear head for whatever was coming. After our drinks arrived, an awkward silence fell over the table. We all reached for the menu simultaneously, using it as a shield against the inevitable conversation. "The salmon looks good," Claire said finally, breaking the tension. "It does," Mom agreed too quickly. "And the risotto. I've always loved a good risotto." I set my menu down decisively. Let's not do this. We didn't drive for hours to discuss the menu options. Mom's shoulders sagged slightly. "You're right, of course." She took a fortifying sip of her wine. "I'm not sure where to begin." "How about with an apology?" Claire suggested, her tone gentle but firm. "A real one, not the kind that's actually a deflection or a guilt trip." Mom looked startled, unused to such directness from my typically diplomatic sister. She set her wine glass down carefully. "You're right," she said again, her voice small. "I owe you both apologies for so many things." She turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Madeline, I am truly sorry for how I've treated you, especially since your father died. I used my grief as an excuse to make you responsible for my happiness, and later for Natalie's. I took advantage of your generosity and your desire for family connection. I allowed Daniel and Natalie to do the same." I remained silent, waiting. This sounded rehearsed, but at least it was accurate. "Claire," Mom continued, turning to my sister, "I'm sorry for putting you in the middle, for expecting you to mediate between Madeline and me. You deserved better from your mother." Claire nodded, her expression guarded. "Thank you for acknowledging that." Mom took a deep breath. "I don't expect forgiveness immediately or perhaps ever, but I want you both to know that I recognize the harm I've caused, and I'm committed to doing better. Daniel and I have started seeing a family therapist. It's challenging, but necessary." That genuinely surprised me. Mom had always dismissed therapy as pointless navel-gazing. "That's a significant step," I acknowledged. "What prompted it?" "Several things," Mom said, twisting her napkin nervously. "Natalie's broken engagement forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we raised her. Daniel's retirement planning made us take a hard look at our financial situation and dependencies. And losing my relationship with you, Madeline. That was the final wake-up call." I realized I was at risk of losing Claire too, if I didn't make serious changes. Our waiter appeared to take our food orders, providing a brief respite from the intense conversation. After he left, Claire picked up the thread. These realizations are important, Mom, but they're just the beginning. We need to see sustained change, not just good intentions in the moment. Mom nodded, accepting the challenge. I understand. I'm not asking for immediate trust or forgiveness, just an opportunity to demonstrate that change over time. I considered her words carefully. This was the most genuine I'd seen my mother in years, perhaps since before Dad died. The cynical part of me wondered if it would last, if this apparent epiphany would fade once the immediate crisis had passed. But the hopeful part, the part that still yearned for a healthy relationship with my mother, wanted to believe her. I'm willing to give you that opportunity, I said finally, but with conditions. First, my financial support to the family is over, permanently. I'll help Natalie learn to manage her money, but I won't bail any of you out of financial difficulties. Going forward, Mom nodded, accepting this without argument. Second, I expect respect for my boundaries, personal, emotional, and financial. If I say no to something, that's the end of the discussion. No guilt trips, no manipulation, no going behind my back. Agreed, Mom said quietly. And third, I continued, I need honesty. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. That seems fair, Mom agreed, looking relieved that my conditions weren't more severe. Claire spoke up then. I have conditions too. I need you to stop comparing us to each other. No more, why can't you be more like Madeline or Natalie would? Never do that. We're different people with different strengths and challenges. Mom winced, recognizing her own phrases quoted back at her. You're right. I've done that all your lives, and it's been harmful to all of you. I'll work on seeing and appreciating each of you for who you are. Our food arrived, and we ate, in a silence that was thoughtful rather than tense. As we finished our meals, Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. I've been saving this for the right moment, she said, placing it on the table between us. Your father gave me this on our 10th anniversary, the year before he died. He said it represented our journey together, not always smooth, but precious and enduring. She opened the box to reveal a delicate gold bracelet with 3 small gemstones, a ruby, a sapphire, and an emerald. These represent the 3 of you, Madeline, Claire, and the child we lost before Natalie. I froze, my fork suspended mid-air. What child? Mom's eyes widened in shock. You didn't know? I assumed your father had told you. Told me what exactly? My voice was barely a whisper. After Claire was born, I became pregnant again. A little boy. We lost him in the 2nd trimester. It was devastating. Your father and I agreed not to burden you girls with that knowledge. You were so young. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. A brother I never knew about. A loss my parents had endured alone. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Mom's periods of inexplicable sadness, Dad's protective hovering over her, the strange gap in our family photos during that year. That's why you latched onto Daniel so quickly after Dad died, I said slowly, pieces falling into place. You couldn't face losing someone else. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I was terrified of being alone with that grief. Again, Daniel was safe, stable. He didn't know about the baby, about that part of me. It was a fresh start. Claire reached across the table to take Mom's hand. Why are you telling us this now? Because I promised honesty, Mom said simply. No more secrets, even painful ones. And because I want you to understand that while it doesn't excuse my behavior, my choices have been shaped by fears and losses I never properly faced. I stared at the bracelet, at the small emerald that represented a brother I would never know. "What was his name going to be?" I asked softly. "David Jr.," Mom said, her voice breaking. "Your father was so excited about having a son." We sat in silence, absorbing this new dimension to our family history. Finally, I reached for the bracelet, running my finger over the gemstones. "You should keep this," I said, closing the box and pushing it gently back toward her. "It's part of your story with Dad." Mom shook her head. "I want you to have it, both of you to share. A reminder that family bonds endure, even through loss and change." Against my better judgment, I felt tears welling in my eyes. "Thank you for telling us, for being honest, finally." As we finished our dinner and prepared to go our separate ways, Mom embraced each of us, tentatively at first, then with the fierce protectiveness I remembered from childhood. "I've made so many mistakes," she whispered, "but loving you girls has never been one of them, even when I showed it poorly." Walking back to our hotel, Claire and I were quiet, processing everything we'd learned. The revelation about our lost brother had shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamics, casting Mom's failings in a more compassionate light without erasing them. "Do you believe her?" Claire asked as we entered our hotel room. "About wanting to change?" I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, emotionally drained. "I believe she wants to. Whether she can sustain it. That's the real question." "I guess time will tell," Claire said, slipping off her shoes. "But tonight felt like a real beginning, don't you think?" I nodded slowly, thinking of the bracelet now nestled in my purse, of the brother we never knew, of the mother we were perhaps meeting truly for the first time. "Yes," I said finally. "A beginning, not an ending. And that's something." As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when thinking about my family. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone seeking approval, but the cautious optimism of someone glimpsing the possibility of genuine connection. My sister had cut me out of her wedding party but forgot I was paying for everything. That crisis had broken open our family's dysfunctional patterns, forcing us to confront hard truths we'd avoided for decades. Whether we could build something healthier from those broken pieces remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I believed it might be possible. And for now, that was enough. August brought a gentle cooling to Seattle's summer heat, the mornings touched with a crispness that hinted at autumn's approach. The past month since our dinner with Mom had been a period of cautious rebuilding. Tentative text messages, occasional phone calls, a careful dance of rediscovering each other without falling back into old patterns. The revelation about our lost brother had shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamics. I found myself viewing Mom's choices through a more compassionate lens, recognizing how grief and fear had shaped her decisions even while holding firm to my boundaries. Work had been particularly demanding, our company preparing to launch a major software update that had consumed most of my waking hours. The intensity was a welcome distraction, keeping me anchored in the tangible world of deadlines and deliverables, rather than the murkier terrain of family reconciliation. On the third Saturday of August, I was at my desk reviewing code when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Natalie. We'd maintained regular contact since our financial counseling sessions, but usually through texts or scheduled meetings. An unexpected weekend call was unusual. "Nat? Everything okay?" I answered, immediately concerned. "Everything's fine," she assured me quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I have news." I saved my work and leaned back in my chair. "Good news, I hope." "The best." Her voice bubbled with excitement. "I got promoted! Junior marketing manager with a 15% salary increase and benefits. I start next week." "Natalie, that's fantastic." The genuine pride in my voice surprised me with its intensity. "You've earned this. I know how hard you've been working." I have a proper career path now, she continued. My boss says if I keep performing at this level, I could make senior manager within 2 years. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning every word. This calls for a celebration. Dinner tonight? My treat. There was a slight pause before Natalie responded, her tone shifting to something more hesitant. Actually, I was hoping we could do something different. Remember how you mentioned that financial literacy program you volunteer with? The one for young women? Yes, of course. I'd been mentoring at Women's Financial Empowerment for nearly 3 years, teaching basics of budgeting, saving, and investing to girls from underserved communities. I was thinking, maybe I could come with you sometime, see what it's all about, and maybe eventually volunteer too? The request caught me completely off guard. In all our years together, Natalie had never shown interest in my volunteer work, much less expressed a desire to participate. You want to volunteer at WFE? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Is that weird? Natalie sounded suddenly uncertain. I just thought, well, I've learned so much from you these past few months. Things I should have known years ago. Maybe I could help other young women avoid the mistakes I made. A lump formed in my throat. That's not weird at all, Nat. It's wonderful. The next session is Tuesday evening. I'd love to have you join me. Really? The relief in her voice was palpable. Great. I'll clear my schedule. As we chatted about the details, I found myself marveling at the changes in my sister. The self-centered young woman who had demanded an extravagant wedding was evolving into someone with perspective, ambition, and a desire to give back. It was a transformation I wouldn't have believed possible 6 months ago. Oh, and Maddie? Natalie added as we were about to hang up. Mom mentioned you might come by for dinner tomorrow. Are you still planning to? I hesitated. Mom had indeed invited me for Sunday dinner, the first time I'd be back at the house. My house, technically, since our confrontation. Yes, I'll be there. Claire, too, if she can make it up from Portland. Good. Natalie's voice softened. It means a lot. To Mom. To all of us, really. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, contemplating how much had changed since that disastrous lunch at Café Lucille, when Natalie and Mom had ambushed me with wedding expenses. The painful confrontation had forced our family to face long-buried issues, catalyzing a transformation none of us could have anticipated. Sunday arrived with perfect late summer weather, golden sunshine tempering the slight chill in the air. As I drove to the suburban house where I'd spent my teenage years, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. This would be the first time all of us had been together since Uncle James's birthday party. Claire was already there. When I arrived, her car parked in the driveway beside Natalie's modest Honda. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts, before making my way to the front door. It opened before I could knock, Mom standing on the threshold with a tentative smile. Madeline, she said softly, you came. I said I would, I replied, returning her smile with equal caution. The house smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread, familiar and comforting in a way that caught me by surprise. Claire and Natalie were setting the dining room table, continuing a conversation that involved much laughter. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron and looking oddly domestic. You cook now? I asked him, genuinely surprised. In all the years I'd known him, Daniel had never shown any interest in culinary pursuits. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Retirement gives you time to learn new things, and your mother deserves a break after all these years of doing everything for us. Another small but significant change. I filed it away as evidence of the shifts occurring in their relationship dynamic. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in years. We carefully avoided contentious topics, focusing instead on Claire's recent promotion at her graphic design firm, Natalie's new position, and Daniel's adventures in cooking. Mom seemed content to listen, occasionally adding a comment or question, but mostly observing with quiet satisfaction. As we finished dessert, a store-bought cheesecake that Mom acknowledged with a self-deprecating laugh had been purchased rather than homemade, Daniel cleared his throat purposefully. "Before everyone leaves, your mother and I have something we'd like to discuss with you all." The familiar phrase sent a reflexive jolt of anxiety through me, echoes of past discussions that had invariably involved requests for money or other forms of support. Claire caught my eye across the table, her expression mirroring my concern. Mom must have noticed our reaction because she quickly added, "It's nothing bad, I promise. In fact, we hope you'll see it as a positive step." Daniel nodded, continuing, "As you know, I've been fully retired for 3 months now. Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about what we want the next chapter of our lives to look like. We've decided to downsize," Mom said, looking directly at me. "This house, it's too big for just the two of us. The maintenance is becoming too much, and frankly, the memories here are complicated for all of us." I blinked in surprise. This was the last thing I had expected. "You want to sell the house?" "Not exactly," Daniel said carefully. "The house is yours, Madeline. We're simply acknowledging that reality and making decisions accordingly. We've found a condo in a retirement community about 20 minutes from here," Mom explained. "Single-level living, maintenance included, activities and amenities on site. It's perfect for this stage of our lives." I struggled to process this information. For years, they had lived in my house as if it were their own, never acknowledging my ownership. Now they were voluntarily moving out? "When did you decide this?" I asked, still trying to catch up. "We've been discussing it since James's birthday party," Daniel said. "Our sessions with the therapist have helped us recognize that continuing to live in your house, particularly without proper acknowledgement or compensation, was part of an unhealthy pattern. We should have moved years ago," Mom added, her voice tinged with regret, "when it first became legally yours. Our failure to do so was just another way we took advantage of your generosity." Natalie looked between us, clearly surprised by this revelation. "Wait, the house belongs to Madeline? Since when?" "Since I turned 25, I explained gently. "It was left to me by Dad's parents." "And you've been letting Mom and Dad live here rent-free all this time?" Natalie looked stunned. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because we were wrong not to acknowledge it," Mom said firmly. "Just as we were wrong to expect Madeline to finance your wedding or pay your expenses. These were patterns we established and maintained, and they weren't fair to any of you." The frank admission left me momentarily speechless. This was a level of accountability I hadn't expected, certainly not so soon after our initial reconciliation. "So, what happens now?" Claire asked, practical as always. "When are you planning to move?" "We've put a deposit on the condo," Daniel replied. "The move would be in October, assuming all the paperwork goes through." "And what about the house?" I asked, the implications of their decision beginning to sink in. "If they moved out, I would need to decide whether to sell, rent, or move in myself." "That's entirely up to you," Mom said. "It's your house, your decision. We'll leave it in good condition, of course." The conversation shifted to practical matters, the timeline for their move, the logistics of downsizing decades of accumulated possessions, the features of their new condo. As we talked, I found myself oddly emotional. The house represented so much of our complicated family history, both the painful memories and the rare moments of connection. The thought of it standing empty, or worse, being sold to strangers, created an unexpected ache. After coffee, Claire and Natalie helped clear the table while Mom showed me photos of the retirement community on her tablet. As Daniel loaded the dishwasher, another surprising domestic skill he'd apparently acquired, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. The dynamics had shifted subtly but significantly. Mom deferred to Daniel less, expressing her own opinions more confidently. Daniel, in turn, seemed more engaged, less detached from family interactions. And Natalie, the change in her was perhaps the most dramatic, her former entitlement replaced by a new awareness and consideration. As the evening wound down, Mom walked me to my car. The late summer twilight had given way to darkness, the street quiet except for the distant sound of a neighbor's wind chimes. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said, hugging her cardigan around her shoulders against the evening chill. "It meant a lot to have you here." "It was nice," I admitted. "Different, but nice." Mom hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner with Claire last month. About honesty even when it's uncomfortable. There's something else I need to tell you." My guard instantly rose. "What is it?" "It's about the house," she said, her voice quiet in the darkness. "Your father and I originally planned to tell you about the inheritance together when you turned 18. After he died, I chose not to. I told myself it was to protect you from additional stress during your grief. But the truth is more selfish." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I was afraid if you knew about the house, you might choose to live there without us once you turned 18. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too, so soon after losing your father and the baby. So I kept quiet, letting you believe the house was ours." The admission was a painful one, but not entirely surprising, given everything I'd learned about Mom's fear of abandonment. "Thank you for telling me the truth, finally," I said softly. "I should have told you years ago," she acknowledged. "Just as I should have told you about your brother. Keeping these secrets created distance between us, exactly what I was trying to prevent." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of past decisions hanging between us. "What will you do with the house?" Mom finally asked. "After we move?" I had been considering this question throughout dinner, and to my surprise, an answer had begun to form. "I'm thinking of turning it into something useful," I said slowly. "Maybe a transitional home for young women aging out of foster care, or a residence for single mothers going back to school." Mom looked surprised. "You wouldn't sell it? Or live in it yourself?" I shook my head. "I love my condo in the city, and selling feels wrong somehow. Dad grew up in that house. His parents wanted it to stay in the family, to provide security. I think transforming it into something that helps others secure their futures would honor that intention." To my surprise, tears welled in Mom's eyes. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become," she whispered. "I am too, though I haven't said it nearly often enough." The words I had longed to hear for most of my adult life washed over me, bittersweet in their delayed arrival but precious nonetheless. "Thank you," I said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions her validation stirred. As I drove home that night, the city lights gleaming against the dark canvas of the sound, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The road to healing with my family would be long and undoubtedly bumpy, but for the first time, I believed we were all genuinely committed to the journey. The following week brought a flurry of activity, final preparations for our company's software launch, Natalie's first visit to the Women's Financial Empowerment Program, and initial research into what would be involved in converting the family home into a transitional residence for young women in need. To my delight, Natalie took to the financial literacy program with unexpected enthusiasm. Her personal experience with financial mismanagement, followed by her journey toward financial independence, resonated deeply with the teenage participants. By the end of the evening, she was exchanging contact information with the program director and discussing a regular volunteer commitment. "You were amazing with those girls," I told her as we walked to our cars afterward. "They really connected with your story." Natalie smiled, a hint of shyness in her expression that I rarely associated with my confident sister. It felt good to share what I've learned, to turn my mistakes into something useful for someone else. That's the real power of vulnerability, I agreed. When we're honest about our struggles, it creates space for others to learn and grow. I've been thinking, Natalie said, hesitating slightly, about Ryan and the wedding and everything that happened. I waited, letting her gather her thoughts. I was so angry at you when it all fell apart, she continued. I blamed you completely, convinced myself that if you had just paid for everything like I wanted, Ryan and I would be married and happy now. And now? I prompted gently when she paused. Now I realize the wedding was never the problem, Natalie admitted. The problem was that I was trying to build a life with someone when I hadn't even figured out who I was or what I wanted. I was using the wedding to avoid the harder work of becoming an independent adult. The insight surprised me with its depth and clarity. That's impressively self-aware, Nat. She shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. Turns out, therapy isn't just pointless navel-gazing after all. Mom may have been onto something with those family sessions. We laughed together, a moment of genuine connection that felt refreshingly uncomplicated. As we said goodbye, Natalie hugged me impulsively. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me, even when I was being absolutely horrible. I hugged her back, throat tight with emotion. That's what sisters do, I replied. The real kind, not the ATM kind. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Sunday dinners at Mom and Daniel's became a regular occurrence, though we rotated locations between their house, my condo, and occasionally Claire's apartment when she was in Seattle. The conversations grew easier, more genuine, as we gradually learned to relate to each other as adults rather than falling into childhood patterns. Mom and Daniel continued their therapy sessions, sometimes sharing insights that both surprised and moved me. Daniel, in particular, seemed to be confronting his role in our family dynamics with unexpected honesty. I always felt like an outsider, with you and Claire, he admitted during one dinner. You were Robert's daughters, not mine. Instead of working to build my own relationship with you, I focused all my attention on Natalie, where I felt secure. It wasn't fair to any of you. These moments of vulnerability created openings for healing that I never imagined possible. Slowly, tentatively, we were dismantling the walls of resentment and misunderstanding that had defined our relationships for so long. September melted into October, the city transformed by autumn's vivid palette. Mom and Daniel's move to the retirement community proceeded smoothly. Years of accumulated possessions sorted, donated, or packed for their new, smaller space. I took a week off work to help with the transition, spending more focused time with them than I had in years. On their final night in the house, after the moving truck had taken the last of their furniture, we ordered pizza and sat on folding chairs in the empty living room. The space echoed with our voices, strangely amplified without the familiar furnishings, to absorb the sound. 43 years in this house, Mom mused, looking around the bare walls with a mixture of nostalgia and relief. First with your grandparents while your father and I saved for our own place, then raising you girls after they passed. So many memories. Are you sad to be leaving? I asked, genuinely curious. Mom considered the question carefully. Sad isn't quite the right word. Grateful, I think. Grateful for the shelter this home provided through different chapters of our lives, and ready for what comes next. Daniel nodded in agreement. This house served its purpose for us. Now it's time for it to serve a new purpose for others. Ugh! My plans for the house had evolved over the past month. After consultations with social workers, nonprofit organizations, and city officials, I had decided to donate the property to a women's support organization that would convert it into a transitional home for young women aging out of foster care. The program would provide affordable housing along with mentoring, education support, and life skills training for up to 6 women at a time. Have you settled on a name for the home? Claire asked, reaching for another slice of pizza. I nodded, a bit self-conscious about my decision. The Robert Bennett House for Young Women, after Dad. Mom's eyes filled with tears. He would be honored, she said softly, using this home to help young women find their footing in the world. It's exactly the kind of legacy he would have wanted. The renovation work starts next week, I explained. The foundation estimates it will be ready to welcome the first residents by January. And as we finished our makeshift dinner and prepared to leave the house for the final time, I found myself lingering in the empty rooms, memories washing over me like gentle waves. This house had witnessed the full spectrum of our family experience: joy and grief, love and loss, conflict and reconciliation. Now it would bear witness to new stories, new beginnings for young women at crucial turning points in their lives. Mom found me in what had once been my bedroom, staring out the window at the large maple tree whose branches had scraped against the glass during winter storms. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, joining me at the window. "I was just thinking about cycles," I said. "How things come full circle sometimes. This house provided security for our family when we needed it most. Now it will do the same for others." Mom nodded, understanding. "And what about us? Have we come full circle too?" I considered the question carefully. Not full circle, I decided. More like a spiral. We're covering similar ground, but at a different level. Learning from the past rather than repeating it. "I like that image," Mom said. "A spiral, moving upward." As we locked the door behind us for the final time, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. The house keys, always rightfully mine but never before in my possession, weighed heavy in my hand, symbolic of the shifting power dynamic in our family. Tomorrow, I would hand these keys to the foundation director, transferring not just a property, but a possibility. The thought filled me with a quiet satisfaction that far surpassed any material wealth or professional achievement. In the months that followed, our family continued its cautious evolution. Mom and Daniel thrived in their new community, developing friendships and pursuing interests they had neglected during years of family obligations. Natalie secured another promotion at work and began dating again, this time with a healthier perspective on relationships and financial partnership. Claire accepted a design director position in Seattle, moving closer to family while maintaining her cherished independence. As for me, I found myself gradually lowering the emotional walls I had built. After years of feeling exploited by my family, the boundaries remained firm. I had learned that lesson well, but they no longer needed to be fortified with resentment and distrust. December brought the official opening of the Robert Bennett House for Young Women. The renovation had transformed the family home while maintaining its essential character: warm, welcoming, solid. Standing on the porch during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by family, foundation staff, and community members, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had in years. "If he could see this," Claire murmured beside me, seeming to sense my thoughts, "he'd be beaming with pride." "He can see it," Mom said with quiet certainty from my other side, "and he is proud of all of us." As winter settled over Seattle, bringing short days and long nights illuminated by holiday lights, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. What had begun with a selfish demand, my sister cutting me out of her wedding party, while still expecting me to pay for everything, had catalyzed a family transformation none of us could have anticipated. The painful confrontation had forced us to face long-buried truths, to examine patterns established over decades, to acknowledge hurts inflicted and received. The process had been messy, uncomfortable, often painful, but ultimately healing in ways I never imagined possible. My sister had cut me out of her wedding, but in doing so, she had inadvertently opened the door to something far more valuable than any celebration could provide: authenticity, accountability, and the chance to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or exploitation. As the year drew to a close, I stood on my condo balcony watching snow fall gently over the city. transforming the familiar landscape into something new and pristine. Tomorrow would bring our first Christmas dinner at Mom and Daniel's new place. Smaller, simpler, but somehow more meaningful than the elaborate celebrations of the past. For so long, I had measured my worth in my family by what I could provide: financial support, problem-solving, stability. Now, finally, I understood that my true value had nothing to do with my bank account or my willingness to rescue others from the consequences of their choices. My worth, like everyone's, was inherent, not earned through giving or diminished through boundary setting. It had taken a wedding that never happened to teach me that lesson. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come in the most unexpected packages. As I turned back inside, closing the balcony door against the cold, I smiled at the thought. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own opportunities for growth and connection. Our family would continue to evolve, to learn, to make mistakes, and begin again. But tonight, watching snow transform the world outside my window, I was at peace with both the journey behind and the path ahead, no longer defined by what I could give, but by who I chose to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.